Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Do you know what an attachment style is, or what attachment theory is? Recently, I put a poll out on my channel, and I asked whether or not you'd like to hear more relationship-oriented content. Because in real life, I'm a relationship counselor, and I haven't done a lot of that on this channel itself. When I say relationships, I don't mean just between partners. It's all relationships. All of this information I'm about to give you is applicable to any relationship in your life. As usually happens, we go through phases where different terms have a resurgence, or people are using them more, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And I'm all for people having more access to information. I also think sometimes it's helpful to get that information from a person who is licensed to give it and has a background studying it. Attachment theory, quick definition, is the theory that how you attach to your primary caregiver, aka how your primary caregiver in the beginning of your life meets the needs that you have that you can't meet yourself, then informs the ways that you attach to significant relationships in your life beyond childhood. Think about a baby crying. The baby can't get up and feed themselves. They can't take a walk if they want one. They can't change their diapers. They have needs that have to be met by their caregivers. And the way that your primary caregiver met your needs in the beginning of your life, that's going to play out for the rest of your life because it is that ingrained. And the way that plays out for the rest of your life has impacts in how you resolve conflict, how you understand the care given to you by someone you're in a relationship with, how you feel about things like emotional and physical intimacy, and how you understand your expectations and your needs in relationships throughout your life. There are 4 main attachment styles, and if you do a quick Google search, you'll see that there's a couple different names for each of them. I'm going to use the most prevalent names, which is secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. If you look at this chart right here, you've got trust self or don't trust self, and then you've got trusting others and not trusting others, and that's where each of these 4 sort of lie. So for instance, an avoidant attachment style trusts self but has very low trust in others. An anxious attachment style trusts others but has very low trust in themselves. A disorganized attachment style, which is also called anxious avoidant, is no trust in either, which leads to personally some mixed messages for the person who has that attachment style, and also confusing messages for those they're trying to be in relationship with. And then you've got secure, which is trust in self and trust in others. You can probably guess people get to secure by having their needs met in a timely manner and not being left to either fend for themselves or wonder at when their needs might be met. Explaining the 4, we're going to take anxious first. So people with an anxious attachment style have certain needs. They have an intensity to connect and identify with their partner. They tend to prioritize their partner's emotional state, especially over their own. And they always need more and more intimacy and connection with their partner. And that's to say there's not enough, like there's never enough closeness with their partner. Certain stressors for people with anxious attachment are inconsistency in behavior on the part of the other person or people that they are in relationship with. Inconsistency also in like patterns and routines and responses to them. They might feel unsure of their partner's connection to them or their partner's emotional status. Even if the partner is saying, I feel this way, they're likely to second guess that. Also, if a partner pulls away without explanation, that's likely to stress them out too. If your partner has this anxious attachment style, some ways you can help them would be to be clear about your feelings, give regular, consistent reminders of love and care that you have for the other person, stay in close physical proximity when possible, and outlining expectations clearly. People with anxious attachment style can be seen as codependent. They often give their love away too easily to people, as in they don't wait and see who the person really is before they start planning their life with them sometimes. If a person with anxious attachment is in an argument with someone, they'll often feel panic about not receiving a response right away. They have a hard time giving their partner the space and time to come up with how they feel about something or to respond to something they've said. It can lead to some really serious stress, really serious panic, to not know where they stand or to have an argument or a discussion go unresolved for a long period of time. Inconsistent caregiving by your primary caregiver is typically understood to be the way that most people achieve this anxious attachment style, which is to say your needs were only met sometimes and they weren't met with regularity in the timing. Avoidant attachment style. People with avoidant attachment style tend to be emotionally distant. Not all the time, but at times, usually in times especially of stress. They also tend to pull away or detach a little bit when they're faced with emotional intimacy or closeness. People with avoidant attachment style tend to fear or be stressed out by big emotions reflected to them by someone else, big feelings without proper preparation for the discussion, an unplanned stressful conversation, and feeling unwelcome in a situation or unsafe to be themselves. If you are the partner of someone who has the avoidant attachment style, some of the things that would help them would be for you to allow space when they take space with check-ins, allow breaks with a scheduled return. Under their flat affect, which they'll typically have when emotions get intense, is usually fear. It's usually prompted by fear, and then they just sort of shut down. And advanced planning for emotional conversations. So that is to say, if you're having an argument with someone who has avoidant attachment style, they're more likely to detach and walk away, either to avoid conflict or because they want to avoid dealing with their own emotions in a situation. And that's okay. If someone needs to walk away during an argument, they're allowed to. If someone has an avoidant attachment style, and that's typically why they're walking away, having an understanding of when we have a conversation that gets too much for you and you walk away, we check in 30 minutes. So you know that there's a scheduled check-in and they have time to sort of deal with their feelings on their own without feeling smothered. But there's also a plan, because otherwise the person with the avoidant attachment style will just avoid that piece as long as they possibly can. Like if you let them sort of avoid it and then you bring it up to them with no warning, you're starting the cycle again because, as I said, intense emotional conversations without warning, really bad for this attachment style. Typically, people get avoidant attachment styles by having caregivers who didn't show them care or responsiveness past providing for their basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, but not so much the other needs that you have as a child in order to understand yourself, in order to understand your feelings, in order to interact with each other on a relationship level. Those are usually not met in their childhood. And that's how they gain this idea of avoidant, because they don't know how to deal with those emotions because they never had to deal with them. People who have avoidant attachment styles can be seen as emotionally unavailable. They usually don't give their love very easily. They can be seen as aloof and uncaring. But as I said, that aloofness is hiding fear and hiding uncertainty because they don't know how to act in most of those situations. Let's talk about the disorganized attachment style. It is technically, if you looked at that chart, it's anxious and avoidant, so it can be called anxious avoidant also. Someone with disorganized attachment style has a deep desire for emotional connection and yet are afraid of emotional connection. So they've got the anxious attachment's desire for closeness with the avoidance fear of what happens when they are close. And they can seem like they have inconsistency in their openness to relationships or their openness to discussions. One day they're open and the next day they're not. Sometimes you're just not in the mood to talk about something, right? It goes beyond that. It's typically a pervasive thing across their lifespan. Some of the stressors for people with disorganized attachment style are quick changes in their partner's moods or connection with them, like fast to anger and then quickly cold, or really any behaviors that trigger fear. If you're a partner of someone with disorganized attachment style, being consistent in your tone when you're talking to them, being consistent in how you express the way that you love and care for them, being in tune with their emotions and reflecting them back to them. So I see you are angry. I see you are scared, or I see you seem scared. Sometimes not telling someone how they feel is a better option than telling them this is how you feel. And continuing your steadfast and steady presence on their terms. So the way that they need it. Take cues from them in how they need to understand in snippets your closeness or your needs and how that fits in with theirs. A lot of times people with disorganized attachment styles can seem like they have no boundaries. And they often have trouble giving and receiving love from others. Typically, people with disorganized attachment style are children whose primary caregiver fostered fear in the life of that child. That can happen if the child has been traumatized by a primary caregiver. It can happen if the child witnessed trauma in their home or in their life in general at an early age. It can also happen if you have an overly anxious primary caregiver where they show up with inconsistency for emotional support or lack of emotional support for their child. Most people assume that about 25% of the population has anxious attachment, and people assume that 25% of the population has avoidant attachment, which is about 50% of the population has one of those two. So leaving out disorganized, because that is often trauma-based and can mask itself as either of those, that's 50% of the population that has one of the two. Within the queer community, that number is much higher. If you're going to have healthy relationships, which I hear reflected in the comments constantly. That is a desire for most of you. Knowing your attachment style, knowing your partner's attachment style, knowing your friends' attachment styles is hugely important in order for you to know how best to show up for each other and how best to receive the love that they're trying to give you. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next time. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.